So now let's go to, this class is 160, but I just want to mention there's another one of these tech talks coming up on Thursday when I don't have a class. So I don't know how many people will go to it, but it is a thing to know about. A week from Thursday, there's another tech talk. It sounds pretty good. Security the Internet of Things. It's worth extra credit if you go. I'll be there if I can remember. Oh, and there's another thing I should mention. I got a phone call and some emails yesterday about scholarship opportunities. Here they are, but they're for African American students. If you have African American students with a bachelor's degree that want a master's degree, they can get $150,000 scholarship, and they can also get either to go to this one college in San Jose or to go to any of the top 30 engineering schools. They have these programs, and they can't find enough candidates that are African Americans. They're having to get 85% of them from Africa. They can't find people with a bachelor's degree that want to get a master's, but if you can find any, read these flyers and send them there. There's money available, and they would rather give it to Americans if they can find the Americans. So anyway, all right. And so let's take a look at the chapter here. So we're up to chapter 4. And all right, so we're going to talk about information security programs and management, networks and monitoring, and metrics and monitoring, continuous improvement. So the programs. Let me just make this bigger, I suppose. All right. So here we're going to talk about the outcomes of your program, the charter, which is a document to organize it, the scope of your program, and then some frameworks, a roadmap, and some of these architectures, structures. So to develop your program, first you develop a strategy, which is what you want to accomplish. Then you do gap analysis to decide what is the current situation and what do we want it to be and what's the gap. And then you develop a roadmap and a security program. So your program is going to be the activities that identify, communicate, and address risks. So this is controls, processes, and practices. And the point is to increase the resilience of your computing environment and ensure that you can handle the risks. So you withstand attacks and power outages and all the various things that can happen. So this is something all these security management certifications make a big deal out of. You are a business enabler. You are not here to hamper the business by saying, oh no, you can't do this because it's too risky, and you have to do this irritating password rotation stuff and just drive them nuts. That's what used to happen. Security people are called Dr. No, and they just ruin everything and everybody hates them, and that's not effective. You cannot be that way. You have to be cooperating with the business and saying, I'm here to help the business run better and make sure that we can do whatever we need to do and not get hacked, which is what everybody else wants too, if you can avoid being too irritating about it. And so this is like the brakes on a race car. You say, why do I need brakes on a car? I want it to go fast. Well, if you have to have the brakes, you can slow down to make the curves, and that's what security should be, a way to limit the risk without stopping forward progress. So the outcomes of this, there's various ways to measure it: strategic alignment, risk management, value delivery, resource management, and so on, and we'll talk about these. Strategic alignment is what I've been describing. It is the security process that integrates into the function of the business, so it helps the business succeed instead of being like an obstacle that blocks the business from succeeding. So you have to be aware of the initiatives of the business. You have to develop risk tolerance. This is the thing. First, amateurs will say, no, you can't do that because you want to have an Android app. They'll say, oh, no, you can't do that because it's too risky. And that's stupid. Of course, you have a business reason to do it. It would benefit your business to have it. So you have to say, well, we should do it the right way to lower the risk. But everything you do has some risk, and you can't tell people to just not do something because it's risky unless you have a really good reason for that, because the proposals come because there is a business reason to do it. So there is a benefit, and therefore there ought to be some level of acceptable risk. And if you're good at that, then you have mutual trust. Then the other parts of the company trust the security team to help them, and then they will tell you what they need, and you can help them do it. Whereas if you let yourself become hostile with parts of the company, then they will just sneak around and do things without your security team having any chance to improve them. So that's why you should be communicating with all the stakeholders. I'll try something that comes up a lot in all the classes and podcasts I do is security is a human problem. It is not a technological problem. It was around before technology, and it's around on the parts of your company that are not technological. It is a matter of human behavior and human relationships, and the technology is just a detail. Risk management identifies risks and then determines what treatments are necessary to get to lower those risks to acceptable levels. And value delivery is when you reduce the risks to an acceptable level and people can see that you're accomplishing something. So resource management is another issue. To avoid wasting money and time, you have all these people at your company, temporary staff, external providers, and if you want to use them effectively, so you want to right-size your information security budget so that you're actually accomplishing things. This is a persistent point of difficulty, is justifying the money that your security program costs, because other things, like if you have advertising, they can say, well, we spent $1 million in advertising and that led to this much increased sales, so I can see what the return was in that investment. But if you spend $1 million on security, it doesn't bring in any money, not directly. It doesn't cause more sales or anything. So how do I know if that was a good investment or not? This is a persistent argument, and our whole field of security suffers from lack of security metrics. Unfortunately, nobody knows how to boil down how many dollars per year did you gain by going to two-factor authentication. Now, sometimes you can do it because you meet like a certification like PCI compliance, and now we can take credit cards and that's going to improve our business. But usually there's no immediate obvious financial benefit for implementing a security program, and that is a problem, justifying the program. So you can, however, measure performance, security metrics, to have a measurement of your program to some extent. You're not going to get it down to dollars per year, but you can get down to things like how many incidents do we detect, how quickly do we respond to incidents, how quickly do we resolve incidents. Those are pretty good measures, and you can at least show a trend of improvement there. And then you can align your program with the other businesses like HR and finance and legal and all these other things. All these should be in partnership with the security team so they can limit the security team can help them prevent creating risk for the company by running these things sloppily. And the charter is the formal written definition of your security program and all the things like timeline, funding, leaders, executives, and so on. This is like a constitution. This is what gives your security team a structure at the company and rules to work with. So the security manager, their job is to enforce security policy, perform risk management, and perform security governance, and to develop controls to limit the risks that you have. So they're going to develop and implement the vulnerability management, incident management, third-party risks, and business continuity planning we talked about, which is how you plan for your business to survive a disaster like a fire. And then, of course, security awareness training for your staff, which it remains popular, although there's a huge argument about whether it's actually worth anything. Most of us find it as just an irritation, but you do have to go to that training. Anyway, it is a team sport. You can't be alone. Whatever you do has to be supported by management or it's not going anywhere. So you can't dictate the program to others. You have to lead people through. That's why I say it's really a human problem. You have to influence people to be more secure, and you have to do it in an effective way so they see you as helping them instead of seeing you as being an obstacle in their way. Now, the board of directors and the executive leaders have the ultimate responsibility for everything at the company, including protecting the information. So you have to have support from above. You have to have a champion at the C level that is behind your security program, or it will not succeed. This is all over the CISSP training. They say, do not come up with a smart idea from a low level and try to push it through. What you must do is you must sell it to upper management, and if they aren't interested, just forget it. All you're doing is ramming your head against the wall. If you can't get upper management to believe that what you're doing is worth doing, then don't try. You cannot do it from a low position. You'll just exhaust yourself and accomplish nothing. You just have to wait for them to get hacked and then go to upper management and say, see, I was right, and see if that helps. But you can't do anything until upper management is actually willing to allocate resources to your security program. Now, once you have a security program, you define its scope, which is what part of the company is going to be covered by your program. And of course, that would matter more in larger organizations where the company is large enough to break it into chunks. And then you have management frameworks. These are business process models. All right. And so there's three popular frameworks: the ISO 27000, the international one, COBIT, and NIST, the CSF framework. The ISO 27000 is an international standard, and it's extremely expensive and complicated and difficult to set up, but it's very detailed, thousands of pages of documents and policies and such to control your whole security program. COBIT from ISACA is another one. for managing your IT organization, and the National Institute of Standards. The U.S. government has this one, the Cybersecurity Framework. This is, again, just a way to organize your security program recommendations. Let's try a Kahoot, which should be here, and it is. All right. Song to go end. Looks like that's it. All right, so which outcome includes establishing trust? That's called strategic alignment, the fancy word for that, where people trust you and therefore you can work together. All right, which outcome includes effectively using staff? That's resource management. I see everybody getting that. That's good, you know. I remember when I used to work, one of my companies, there was a woman there that said, the best day of work is when I show up and I know what to do and I have everything I need to do it and I can get my work done. When you don't know what to do, you don't have the right equipment or something, that's bad resource management, and it happens in a lot of companies. Your staff is wasting your time because you haven't organized things so they can get their work done. All right, what's the formal written document naming the leaders and managers on your security team? That's the charter. All right. And which framework comes from ISACA? COBIT, or not, yeah, COBIT is the one from ISACA. Oh, nobody got it right. Oh, I thought that was easy, but anyway, they all seem easy to me. So, all right. Lenny, Steph, and Tom. All right, so you define your roadmap. These are the steps to achieve your objective. It's tasks and projects to reduce risk. So you have enterprise architecture, and this is both for business and for technical functions. So you have business functions, making sure that your IT systems work, and a model to map these onto your IT environment and system, like many of these frameworks to organize things. So the information security architecture is part of the enterprise architecture, and that's concerned with protecting aspects of the enterprise architecture and specific components that provide preventive or detective security functions like locks and firewalls. So the enterprise architecture makes sure that all your hardware accomplishes the business purpose, that the pieces work well together, that there's an overall structure, that the resources are used efficiently, that it's scalable and flexible. This is a big issue because everybody's company grows. You have to be able to scale to some larger size. You have to make sure you can upgrade things and add additional elements because every part of your company is constantly changing and growing. So you have two layers of the architecture. There's the policy and the standards. The policy is the sort of overarching vague statements like general necessary characteristics, like you have to have centralized authentication, and your standards are more detailed. Specific vendors you're going to use, specific protocols, specific hardening rules, and so on. So you have centralized functions are what you generally want. This is why Windows machines, Microsoft recommends if you have more than 10 machines, you need a domain controller. Because if you have just a work group, which is Windows machines without a controller, then you have to put updates on every machine, you have to put names and passwords on every machine, and you have to keep that updated as you hire and fire staff, and that's very difficult, and pretty soon it gets out of control, and the machines aren't always the same, and people can't log into all the machines they need to, so you get a central domain controller which handles all the logins and all the file shares and all the passwords and everything in one place, and now you can control it. So centralized functions are very important. And with centralized functions, you have the current situation where a small IT staff can manage hundreds or thousands of users or devices, because all they're really doing is managing one central server that controls all those users. So Microsoft Active Directory is used for authentication in a centralized function, and it uses LDAP to move the data across the network of who's logging in and who they are. You can have centralized monitoring, like Splunk, a security information event manager system. So instead of having logs on all different devices, you forward all those logs to one central database, and then you have one central tool to examine the logs. And for your device management, it's the same. For your servers, your ghost images you're pushing out, your mobile devices, network devices, and workstations, you have a central server that controls all that handles all your mobile devices, all your limitations and security policies, and remote wiping for the lost devices and things like that. So here's two enterprise architecture frameworks, TOGAF and Zachman. These are not particularly security models, these are enterprise architecture models. So TOGAF has got a life cycle planning for designing, planning, implementing, and governing, and that's a high-level approach. So it's got phases, a preliminary approach, then you have architecture vision, then you build the architecture for the business, and then the information systems, and then the technology. Then you consider opportunities and solutions and migration, as you have to move from one location to another or from one operating system or server to another. And you govern the implementation of these things, watching over what people do to make sure that what they're doing is correct and helping your business instead of creating trouble. And you have change management and requirements management. These are the management structures, and they have a diagram of that. Your preliminary structure here, and then you have requirements management in the center, and all these parts of the business running, being managed, so they continue to meet the business requirements. The Zachman framework is another one from more than 40 years ago, still dominant, and it compares your IT infrastructure to the maintenance of an office building. So you've got things like this: scope, the enterprise model, systems, technology, detailed representation, and function enterprise. And then you have dates, functional application technology and organization considerations, time and strategy, and fill in all these gaps. So there's just various ways to organize your thinking so you consider all the things that have to be controlled and don't overlook them. And so you implement this thing, you have a big picture and a detailed plan. At the enterprise level, you have things like policy statements and general governance and the major aspects, and then you have decisions to standardize on certain brands of servers and network devices. And at the detailed level, you have detailed configuration and change management systems to control like the configurations of your routers and the group policy settings on your servers. And so if you want to upgrade your DNS infrastructure, then that would be a detailed activity where you have to consider updating many of your devices. So other things you might have to do when you're making changes: software-defined network is all the rage. Now almost all the servers are virtual, the firewalls are virtual, the routers and switches are virtual, the network is virtual. It's all like running on the Amazon cloud. So that's software-defined networking. None of it is actually real hardware. It's all simulated hardware, because then it can grow to meet the demand, and that's why you need services like Kerberos. which are not Kerberos, Kubernetes. Kubernetes is the administration level above this that can spin up multiple servers and also take them down, and it controls this process of spinning up all these virtual devices in a cloud and managing them efficiently. So they only spin up the right number of devices to meet the demand, and they turn them off when there's not much demand to make it efficient. And that closely tied into virtualization and containerized microservices are all the rage, where you have containers. These are Docker containers, which are like virtual machines, but they're much smaller and faster and lighter. And it's a way, if you install Windows software, you can just double click on it and it will go on your machine regardless of what other software you have. And containers bring that to Linux. In Linux, that's typically not true, because when you install something, it needs libraries, and you have to go find the dependencies and install them too, and it's a drag. That's why containers are popular. You'll spin up a container, and that will have a version of Linux and the software with all the libraries installed on it. So that will just run, and you can easily run it on any host, and those are microservices. They also call this stuff serverless functions. You can have a service where it can take requests from the user and provide service, but it's not living on one operating system or one service. That's all managed by the cloud provider invisibly to you. From your point of view, it's just a program that runs. They call it a serverless process.
Will container ever go out of place?
Does a container ever go out of date? Yes.
Go too big?
Yes, well, in principle it does, yes. The way the container works is it has a thing called overlay FS. So if you have like an Ubuntu system and you put a container with like Red Hat on it, it will not duplicate any files that are duplicated on the host. But that would be, you'll have less duplicated files if you put a Red Hat container on Ubuntu than if you put an Ubuntu container on Kubuntu. And if you were to put something like a Windows container on Ubuntu, I don't know if it would run at all. And if it did, it would be the same as a virtual machine. It would have to have a new copy of every file because all the files are different. And the more services you install in the container, the bigger it gets. But typically, the way you do it is you run it on Linux, and you run similar Linux in the containers, and that's why it's much smaller and faster, because most of the files in the container are just copies of the ones on the server, and it doesn't make extra copies. So a server that can run like 10 virtual machines can run like 100 containers.
But the container, you check out the delete and stuff, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of get big, right?
Get what?
Kind of get big.
Yes, if you keep installing more and more stuff on the container, it will get bigger. You don't normally do that. They're not intended for general purpose. They're intended for one purpose. Like I want a web server, so I put in the web server in the container, and now I make that one thing, just to do one service. And then doing many different things, like a general purpose computing, containers are not a good solution for that. This is a very good question. All right, so your program management. You've got security governance we're going to talk about here, and then later on we'll talk about risk management. So, and audits and third-party risk management. So security governance is the management activities that watch over these assets and what people are doing and the processes, and measure them and determine who is in charge and watch to see that things are going well. So the board of directors are responsible for security governance. They're responsible for everything at the company. They establish the tone for the whole company. Then you have an information steering committee, CISO, auditors, CIOs, management, and employees. And this is more or less top down. The information steering committee establishes your operational strategy. They set the roles and responsibilities, and that strategy should align with the overall IT and business strategy. In many companies, they don't. If you read this excellent book called The Phoenix Project, it is extremely nice, and it explains how ordinary businesses have an IT department that is not in the slightest aligned with the business and is just a source of frustration and drives everybody nuts, and the whole company is dysfunctional, and it explains how they clean this up and move into the DevOps world, where they integrate the IT functions with the rest of the business successfully, which is what Amazon pioneered. It's a very good book to read. Anyway, and so the CISO is your main security officer, and they have to develop the policy, conduct risk assessments, and then develop processes to handle all the security functions: vuln management, incident management, identity and access, security awareness and training, and compliance. They develop processes for all these things, and of course they assign it to staff, but they're overseeing it and making sure that all these things are done correctly. And they're ultimately responsible for the success of that, which is why a lot of people say the CISO is just a sacrificial lamb. You're just there to get blamed when we get hacked, and then we'll fire you, and then we put the next guy up there. That is one way it can, if it doesn't work out well, it can be that. Then your auditors are people who check, go through, just like tax forms, they go through forms and audit to make sure that everything's being done right for things like PCI compliance and so on. They just basically a long list of check boxes, and everybody has to like submit reports to the auditor. What information do you have? How is it encrypted? How is it transported? Things like that. The CIO is responsible for the IT organization, not particularly security, so they make the IT strategy, development, operations, and service desk. And management. Every management is somebody who is managing other workers under them, and therefore every manager is to some extent responsible for the conduct of their employees. If their employees are installing unapproved software, getting viruses on the system, doing forbidden things on the systems, the manager is supposed to prevent that. That's a chain of accountability. And the employees have to comply with the security policy, and that's why they have to have security awareness training, which tells them the rules around here, so we can really punish you if you break the rules because we made sure you learned what the rules are. And all right, so that's the point. The reasons why you need security governance, of course, is that everybody's now completely dependent on their information systems. A few decades ago, you could do something like run a bakery and not have any computers and no information system, and it didn't matter. Now everybody has technology running everything, and pretty soon everybody's going to have AI everywhere. So you can't escape having to govern these things. And if you don't correctly govern your security process, then of course you have negligence and breaches and things like that. So the governance program does risk management, process improvement, instant response, and compliance. This is what you hope you will achieve. Like I said, it's hard to justify your security program. You can't say we had this many dollars of increased sales because of our security program. So instead you have to say we have better compliance, we have better business continuity. When there was a security incident that caused a problem, we were able to recover from it more quickly, more thoroughly. These are measurements of your effectiveness. And so if it works, you have increased trust. Everybody can trust you, your customers, your suppliers, and your partners, and you get a good reputation. If you have a successful security program, people feel like they can trust you. As the opposite of, when your hack hits the headlines, then everybody thinks you're a bad company. Well, I'm going to say Cloudflare is greatly respected. I know the CEO is a very cool guy, and they have been hacked like 5 times. They've had security problems, and every time, immediately, they had a complete explanation. Here's what happened, here's why it happened, here's what we did to prevent it from happening again. And I trust them a lot. So nobody's perfect. Everybody gets hacked, but your response determines whether people trust you. And if you just come clean and admit exactly what happened with a good explanation, and you really improve, that's all you can ask for. Everybody gets hacked. The NSA, Yahoo, Google, everybody gets hacked. So it's superhuman to not get hacked. So instead, the best you can do is to be transparent and clear and honest with people about how you're and efficient at responding. If you just lie and say you didn't get hacked when everyone knows you got hacked, that's bad. That's what LinkedIn did before Microsoft bought them. They got hacked, and somebody stole all the passwords, and the person who stole them put them on a Russian forum saying, I can't crack these passwords, and I cracked them myself, and I found my password on the dump. And a bunch of other security people did the same. And LinkedIn said, no, we didn't get hacked. It's all fake. And I was one of the many security people on Twitter at that time saying, dude, you got hacked. That's my password. I know you got hacked. And they continued for 2 weeks to just lie and say, oh, no, we didn't get hacked. And then finally they said, okay, we got hacked. But we asked our lawyer, and we said, well, the information on LinkedIn is not really private. It's like your resume, so it doesn't matter. So we're not going to do anything about it. And I'm like, you can't do that. You can't say, I'm just going to leave criminals running malware on my network, in control of my network, and just keep carrying on business like that doesn't matter. You can't do that. And in fact, they can't do that. Within about a year, they had to spend millions of dollars responding and paying fines and getting sued by everybody. You can't just ignore it. They tried that, though. Then Microsoft bought them, and I think their security policies probably got better after that. Anyway, so let's try another Kahoot. I remember having the same argument with a dozen colleges around here. Criminals are running malware on their system, and I told them, they just said they don't care. And I said, you can't not care. You can't just ignore that. But they tried. I see some comments. Yeah, those are good comments. I'll talk about them after the Kadooks. All right. All right, so which one of these would name specific vendors? The standards, as you might imagine. Our standard is we use Cisco, we use McAfee antivirus, things like that. All right, so which framework came up in the 80s? The Zacrin, all right. And which technique uses multiple independent containers? Those are the microservices. Containers are different than virtualization. Virtualization simulates different hardware, simulates a hard drive and a network card and everything. Microservices run containers, just have the files, and they run on the real hardware. So they're much smaller and much faster. Okay, what are the personnel that verify that your systems are working properly? Those are the auditors. And you can get a CISA to be certified to be an auditor, and it's a perfectly good job to get. All right. All right, Peter. I just want to answer a couple of questions that came up in the Twitch, which I've got them over there. Let me bring them up here. There. A couple of comments. One of them was, for resource management, the organization should pick the right staff for the right job. And yes, of course, that's why you make sure they have the right certification and experience and whatever else. That's part of efficient use of your resources, not putting people in the wrong jobs so they're not effective. And also training your staff is a big issue. People have a big argument about whether you should just exploit your staff and let them quit after a couple of years, or whether you should offer them advancement and training. And the first system is far more common than the second one, which is why most people keep jumping to a new company, because there is no actual promotion available at this company, so they go over here and back here. I was talking to a professional last week, and he said, you know, if a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I would look at a resume, and if I saw that someone kept jumping from job to job, I'd think, what's wrong with this guy? And now if I look at a resume, and someone has stayed at the same company for 10 years, I think, what's wrong with this guy? So it's all reversed. Anyway, and how do they determine what framework to use? And I can say what I think I would do. Mostly it's going to depend on what business you're in, what country you're in, and who your clients are. So if you're selling to the US government, then you would use the NIST framework. If you're selling to an international audience, then you'd use the ISO, that sort of thing. You make a plan. That's why your upper management has to consider this, because it's expensive and difficult to achieve or organize one of these frameworks. So you plan to get compliance with the right framework, so you can tell your customers, I'm doing this framework. They'll say, oh good, that's the framework we like. We know what that means. All right, so I'm going to stop this recording.